teleported 10 years into the future!
Are you sure? Why don't we ask that person over there? Yeah?
My name's Steve Coleman, and sometimes people call me Dobby, and this is my colleague Edric Celestia. We're second year medical students.
Yeah, is it okay if we ask you a couple of questions?
Sure. So, what brings...
Could you tell us what the year and date are?
What year? It's September 28th, 2029.
I have so many questions to ask you. Is Kanye West the president of the United States yet? Oh, has Elon Musk landed on Mars? Has there been a Fortnite resurgence? Has Britain actually left the EU yet?
Yes, no. Did you say you were medical students?
Yes, we're second year medical students.
I used to be a medical student just like you, but then I made a terrible mistake. And now, as you can see, I am unemployed and homeless.
Why? What'd you do?
I went into radiology.
Ooh, yikes.
Wasted job.
And then my job got taken by AI.
So is this the future that we're actually headed for? A future where radiologists are sitting on the sidewalks unemployed? This is one of the questions amongst many that we are here to answer today, or to make some roads towards answering with our wonderful panel of experts from computer science and medicine, and we hope you have a good time. So basically, this club started a few months ago with Stephen. We came with the idea that this sort of club needed to exist in school, a club that gave people the opportunity to learn about AI and other kind of programming technologies, computer science, data science. There wasn't really that sort of presence in Grafton. And yeah, we thought it would be very valuable to have something like this. So we started the group, and yeah, we're really happy to have such a good turnout to our first event. Right, so this event, Will AI Take My Job, is going to talk about a bunch of topics. The first of which is going to be, will AI take my job? What effect will AI have on employment for us as health professionals in the future? It's held in conjunction between AI and medicine. So I'm Christopher Nahill, I'm president of the club, and NZMSA. So I'll have Uma up to say a few words about her side of it.
Sure. Okay. Kieren everyone. Glad that you could join us this evening. So yeah, as Chris said, this is an event that's in collaboration between NZMSA and AI and Medicine, the club. And basically, from my angle of things, AI and technology in healthcare is something that I'm personally really interested in. And I wanted to create an event that could show other medical students just what potential is out there, what kinds of things can we be looking forward to in the future, what's already here. And so, yeah, got in touch with the AI and Medicine group, and together we've collaborated on this. Just a little spiel about NZMSA, because obviously you've all heard about it, but some of you may not know exactly what we do. So basically it's for all medical students in New Zealand, the national body. So if you think of UMSA, we kind of sit overarching UMSA and also Otago University medical students. And basically our job is to advocate for medical students on a national level. So concerns that you have, issues that you want to see like in the forefront, we've got like the political power to kind of try and push that through. You might have seen like the EFTS campaign that would have affected postgrads a lot, and that's a big part of our legacy. Yeah, so just, if you see us around, we're really friendly. We have 3 reps based here in Auckland, and we're always really happy to hear your ideas, talk about what we're up to. Yeah, enjoy the event. It looks like it's going to be great.
Right, thank you, Uma. So now we're going to have panelists introduce themselves. So first, it's going to be 1 to 2 minutes of introduction. So just say your name, what sorts of things you've done, and what sort of areas of medicine and AI you've been in. Right. So first, we don't have someone for the conference slide, do we? No, right, let's go over that. Jim.
Oh, horrifyingly large picture of my head. Okay. Jim Warren, professor of health informatics in the School of Computer Sciences, just down the road at the city campus at the University of Auckland. My background educationally is computer science and information systems, but what was it? My PhD supervisor ran into a neurosurgeon in Columbia Shopping Mall. And the neurosurgeon had an idea about software he wanted to develop, and then PhD students like to make some money programming computers for people who have money, like neurosurgeons. And I got into it, but after I got through my PhD, I started turning it into my research direction. Another turning point for me was a little later. I got really involved in South Australia with a thing involving chronic disease management and care planning. And so I started really being a subspecialist on long-term condition management, which is a really interesting area as compared to, let's say, how you use computers in ICU or something like that, which would be super intensive. The idea of how do you manage diabetes, how do you manage mental illness with computers is more where I'm specialized. And indeed, cardiovascular epidemiology and how we use big data to predict things about and identify inequalities in cardiovascular risk management is one of my big areas. Looking at apps that can support you with anxiety and depression and give you better resilience and mental health, and at the moment aiming at New Zealand youth, especially Maori Pacific youth, is my other big wing of what I do at the moment. That's probably it.
Thank you, Jim. Our next panelist, Kieren.
Hi, so I'm Kieren. That photo was taken like 2 days ago in Christchurch, Hagley Park, but Tam Gardens. So I did a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Science at Auckland many years ago. And I did a whole bunch of papers, like just everything, kind of neuroscience, proteins, immunology, biomedical microbiology. Yeah. But anyway, it's a kind of very complex topic, I thought. So I thought it led into AI at that point. Excited. And then I did honours in it was an anti-cancer drug, but the focus on it in that situation was like personalized medicine and using mass spectrometry, like proteomics sort of thing. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with that yet. It's like genomics, but for proteins. And then from there, I got into med school, and now I'm a med student at 4th year. That's kind of me. Just learning how things work in hospital at the moment.
Thanks, Kieren. All right, Liz.
Kia ora everybody, I'm really excited to be here. I love students, and I was previously involved with the New Zealand Medical Students Association, and you would have seen me do a fist pump before because I was part of the team that led that change to the 7 Fs, so that you guys now have the chance to have a longer student loan to finish your degree, which is really exciting for postgraduate students. So that was a lot of political lobbying, and we took a petition of 25,000 signatures to the steps of Parliament, and that was really fun. So big plug right now for NZMSA. If you want to get involved, then do. And so why I'm here today is because through my connections with the NZMSA, I got involved with an organisation called HIMSS, Health Informatics New Zealand. Now this is an organisation that you should all know about, and I would strongly recommend you going and signing up. I'm pretty sure it's free for students to sign up to their organisation. And the thing I really love about it is it's pan-professional. So it's not just doctors, it's not just nurses, you'll get everybody there. And they run the largest conference in health, and they are so big that there's only 3 locations that can hold them. And so the location we have to go to is next to Mystery Creek, where they run the field days, because it is so big, it won't even fit at Sky City in Auckland. So it's so exciting to be a part of. So I went in 2015, and that's when I got so excited about healthcare technology. And I was like, oh my gosh, we are going to be hit by this freight train that's coming for healthcare. We have been so undisrupted compared to a lot of other industries, and we are so data rich that it just makes sense that AI grows in medicine. And so I started getting really involved, and that was in 2015. And since then, I've been on the board of Health Informatics New Zealand, so giving a student voice and then a junior doctor voice on that board as well. And also do a lot of different things, but my other passion is around mental health. I experienced bullying when I was a medical student, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. Let's do something about it. So we were leveraging technologies into trying to predict mental health and predict psychological risks in the workplace. So that's a startup called Channel, and we work with the University of Auckland, putting that in place into Littlemore Hospital, Auckland District Hospital, North Shore, and St John and Mercy Ascot. So getting lots of uptake in the healthcare scene at the moment.
Thank you, Liz. Next panelist, Art.
Hi, I'm Art Nahill. I'm not sure why I'm here, actually. I don't have any particular special expertise in AI. I'm a clinician across the road at Auckland Hospital. I have a particularly keen interest in diagnosis and diagnostic error and the clinical reasoning that underlies diagnosis. I do a podcast with one of my colleagues at the hospital called I Am Reasoning. And on that podcast, we've spoken a lot about AI and the implications for diagnosis. I also suspect I'm an early adopter, and I use a couple of apps that have algorithms that underlie them that seem to be somewhat helpful in terms of differential diagnosis, etc. So I have some personal experience, but I have a lot of personal interest in how AI can affect diagnosis. I guess that's my role here.
Thank you. And lastly, Chester.
Hey, my name's Chester. I did your degree finished 2010, so 2011, and I worked around Auckland Hospital. I did my specialist exams, and in 2016, I was about 18 months of being a consultant in respiratory and general medicine, but I felt a bit disillusioned. I felt like the future was going to be of a slightly different shape and form than, what I would want it to be if I was a consultant position. And at the same time, I think Mr. Robot came out, and I really wanted to learn how to program. I just thought it was so cool, and I knew nothing about computers, so I tried to self-learn a bit, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I was like, I'm just going to drop clinical medicine for a while, and I'll try on a semester at university. So I enrolled in a Bachelor of Computer Science. I thought I was 29 then, so I still feel like I'm young. And then, one thing led to another, and I realized I just enjoyed it so much. Programming is so deeply enjoyable. And then I finished the degree last year, and now I'm in my first postgrad year, computer science. I initially had no interest in AI, actually. I didn't go into it whatsoever for that reason, but one thing led to another, and you program your first neural network, and it's almost like magic, and you think, gosh, there's no turning back. There's an amalgamation of kind of a disillusionment within medicine about how information is handled and what would be possible with a computer system, and my kind of just genuine interest in computers as well. And I thought, this is a niche which is going to explode. So I kind of wanted to put myself into that position to be able to, have a satisfying and stimulating and fun future. So I've kind of ended up in this space where I still love clinical medicine. I still feel a sense of heart with it and my colleagues in the front line, but my interest now is more in data science, computer programming, artificial intelligence, as applied to health. I haven't really done anything particularly impressive so far, but I'm working with, at the moment, my postgrad research, natural language processing, and trying to use neural networks to manage dialogue agents to learn to talk themselves.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So
So now we're going to get into the panel, and we're not going to hold anything back. We're going to start with the biggest question. So the first area, AI medicine and its impact on the workforce. The very first question is, what are the possibilities of clinicians losing their jobs? Is that something that's going to happen in the near future? Is that something that's far off? What do we think? So this is going to be largely unmoderated. This is going to be up to you guys to just discuss.
Okay, so coming from my perspective, and I'm really acting on all this, I'm speculating because I feel like the AI field is rapidly changing, developing and all that, and it's very hard to predict going forward. But sometime off in the very far future, we will all be out of jobs. That's not just doctors, it's everyone, probably, I don't know. But until that time, which is very far away, yeah, people will estimate when that is, and they call this like singularity, I guess. It's a fictional thing in some ways, science fiction. But until that time, I think as doctors, we will not be losing our jobs for a long time. Like, I think we'll be maybe one of the last people to lose our jobs. But that doesn't mean that we stay as we are doing things right now. We have to be updating ourselves and more of a taking on AI and like really developing with it. Yeah, but so that means our roles will change for sure. Yeah, that's my thought.
I'll go with this, that information technology, computers in general, and AI as just a particular kind of computer programming that does things that we think is human-like. It doesn't tend to eliminate whole jobs. It tends to transform work and transform what workers do. So, if you look at functions like human resource, HR type functions, if you look at functions like payroll and finance and how people do that with, their Zero software now instead of doing it all on paper bookkeeping. I mean, we still have accountants and we still have accountancy, but we also have accountancy software that's really quite smart. It transforms jobs. It often transforms the roles. So doctors are already very regularly working with computer systems all through what they do. As Art said, I'd like to hear more. Increasingly, fairly sophisticated decision support tools are coming into the workflow, and they'll come through more and more. And in some places, maybe radiology could be a ground zero. There may be specific workflows where the role of an AI is very heavy, and then that will route the roles of humans around that in different ways, including if I was going to have a company that had radiology expert system software, the first thing I'd want to do is employ a lot of radiologists to help me keep it to the highest quality possible. So there would be a different job for them that is not sitting on the steps only.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kieren in some regards. I mean, I think if you look far enough into the future, I think our jobs could theoretically be replaced. In the more immediate future, I think that, as you say, Jim, the visual or the pattern recognition kinds of jobs, such as dermatology, such as ophthalmology, such as radiology, those things will be transformed earlier than, for example, the role of a general physician, where much of what we do is cognitive and involves a lot more sort of complex pattern recognition than simply looking at an image and deciding if it is likely to be a melanoma or not. I think it's the wrong way to look at it is as AI being a threat. I mean, I think AI is going to help us all do a far better job for our patients than we're currently able to do. And I think that doctors who don't interact well with AI or don't use AI will be replaced by doctors who do. I'm not sure that all doctors will be replaced, but I think our roles will certainly change, and we will have to interact much more readily and much more, on a much more regular basis with AI. But I think your jobs will be safe.
Yeah, I also agree that it's only going to be as good as we can make it when we're all involved and giving our feedback as well. And there is two sides to medicine. There's art and science, and the whole art side of it is the healing side. Is when you take a patient's pulse and you be with them when they are very, very anxious, when they're worried, and that is never going to be taken away, that human aspect. And so you might have all the best decision-making tools, you might be able to get 99% accuracy on your diagnosis, but sitting there and telling your patient that diagnosis, no robot is going to be able to do that for you. So I really think that, that joint art and science of medicine is going to be more and more important.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said actually. I think probably the future doctor is going to look more like a nurse practitioner than the current doctor, because a lot of the prowess and the glory and the stimulation in clinical medicine comes from kind of someone's working out hard cases or interpreting difficult labs or a chest x-ray, formulating a complex case. And a human's just not going to be able to compete with evolving machine learning in those tasks. Sure, machine learning is not quite at that place yet where it's been demonstrated to, I guess, integrate the results or the interpretation of a whole lot of different types of tests, but it has shown superiority in kind of single tasks. And so there'll probably be another phase where it's able to then integrate multiple different kind of investigation types, like the radiograph with the laboratory results, with possibly the clinical notes. And it'll be hard. I think you'll start to see traction once clinical trials demonstrate superiority against understanding clinical practice, and there'll be a slow evolution in that direction. But nobody wants to see, the human side of care lost. And AI won't be successful if we just wipe out people's jobs. I mean, we really want to enrich people's jobs with AI. But I think that the job is going to end up looking more like a nurse practitioner role, where some of the cognitive stuff is exported to computer systems more, and you perhaps have more time to spend with the patient, which I think is a great thing, but it's going to select different types of people to apply to medicine, because some of the motivations that draw people into medicine at the moment are
not always that wholesome, and so sometimes you don't want those type of people in medicine either. So then it's going to change the workforce, but it's not going to replace the workforce.
I'd just like to add to that, I think I agree with you just on that, and you, Liz, on this human element to medicine that will for a very long time not be replaced, and that's very integral to what we do of the patient. So I feel like going forward into the future, medicine is kind of going to go two ways. On one side, you have those doctors who are much more humanistic, who are much more about communicating and what's happening in the results to the patient and really getting the understanding going and more. But then there will be those doctors who understand the medicine, who are much more focused on the the data aspects and programming that into place. That's how I see possibly things happening, but again, it's speculation.
I might play devil's advocate just a little bit, because I think if you look far enough into the future, I think that AI and robotics, and I know this sounds sort of apocryphal, but I think ultimately it may actually be more empathic than human beings, because AI and robots don't get hungry. They don't have to go to the toilet. They don't get annoyed by people. And as a clinician, we all get annoyed by people. We're human. And I think, AI at some point in time will be able to read the minute changes in your facial musculature, will be able to integrate data from your heart rate and your skin temperature, etc., and will be able to match that to a emotional profile, and will be able to respond in a evidence-based way to your angst. So, I think looking deep into the future, I think actually machines may be more empathic, but where I see a continued role for physicians is in helping the patient to understand what the treatment options may be, but even more so, the data extraction, taking a history and trying to distinguish the answer of, yes, I have chest pain from yes, I have chest pain. That's going to be very, very difficult for a machine to do. And so I think that we will always have at least that role that we can hang on to.
If you hadn't lobbed that particular grenade, I was going to say yes, so that's good because we were agreeing too much. But on one hand, as a computer scientist, I'm probably more conservative than maybe any of you about my belief in terms of how much the cognitive side, the hard cognitive side, can be done by computers. The things that have been demonstrated are very contrived, coin flip questions. Is this image, this nicely standardized image, diabetic retinopathy, or is it not? Yes, no, and hey, look at that, it can actually get that right as often as a panel of specialists. Okay, great. If your job is that well defined and there's nothing else that it can be and they're all the standard images and we're always looking at the same set of images and environmental factors never change, then maybe so. But to integrate that one kind of performance and even a batch of separate tools that can do those kind of things into, say, the whole job that you do as a generalist, I'm not waiting for that to happen. Conversely, the human sides of it, and some of the things Chester's looking at with dialogue and things like that, computing is getting very good at looking at any kind of inputs, such as your choice of words and what you're actually saying, your postures, where your facial muscles are going, all kind of things that can pick up off of infrared on you and stuff like that. And it can read the heck out of you. It can really place where you are on like the 5 dimensions of disgust and interest and joy and whatever, extremely well. And we can then, as computer scientists, program algorithms that choose responses, whether we want to persuade you in a certain way or whether, of course, where all the money is marketing to you and things like that, But and so if you put that into an intelligent agent that is, a face on TV that's already very available, or a little bit more expense onto a physical robot or something like that, or at much less expense into simply the dialogue of a chat agent. And how do we really interact with people nowadays? Mainly we just text them, right? So all you need is the text to be like a human in the 21st century. A computer could really be very good at being a friend, at sympathizing, and potentially at providing at least some basic kind of counseling and responses. What's more challenging is for it to really deeply understand what you're talking about and the situation and formulate a complete care plan or management plan or something like that. So funnily enough, I think humans are actually going to be stronger in the cognitive, and that we might go to empathy to our favorite agent a little sooner. What that does to us as humans, I'm not sure, but they'll still be doctors.
Question? Yeah, this is something about Nahill. What was the main reason that AI can replace us in terms of being empathetic, but not in terms of like extracting a history?
So, sorry, what was the question? Why is that?
Yeah, that's so. Why do you think AI can replace us in being empathetic and saying the right things, but not in extracting a history from a patient?
Well, because the parameters around emotional responses are more well defined than people trying to answer a question like, what do you mean by dizzy? I had a patient this morning who came in with dizziness. 3 people took a history and 3 people got different histories from that patient. There are certain things like the nature of pain, the nature of dizziness. We're limited by our verbal responses, and it's incredibly difficult to get a history, to get an accurate history from patients. And if you don't get that accurate history, whether it's human cognition or whether it's machine cognition, the output is rubbish. So I don't see an immediate way. Maybe these guys do see an immediate way, but I don't see an immediate way that that's going to be replaced by machine algorithm. It took us just constant choosing different kinds of examples of feelings to say, for the patient to choose from, to figure out what in fact they meant by dizziness. And so that's far more common than anyone believes. I mean, I think as medical students, you have this idea that you ask a question and you will get a response. But in fact, sometimes, most of my time is just figuring out what the hell does this person mean? And I just don't see that being taken over by machines anytime soon.
Alright, we'll move on to our next prompt then. So this might be more directed towards us. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but what kind of role do you think that AI might play in diagnostics?
Well, I mean, I think at some point in 1970, there was a man named Larry Weed, who was the father of the soap note, which we all use. But he actually realized way back in the 70s that the human mind is not capable of holding in place all of the information it needs to hold in order to make accurate diagnoses. We know that internationally the error rate, the reported error rate in terms of diagnosis is 15 to 20%. It may very well be higher. I may be making mistakes every single day, but I just don't know it at this point in time. And so, I think if you have accurate input of information into a learning algorithm, ultimately you will have better diagnostic accuracy than we are capable of producing by ourselves. I know that when I've got 15 new patients to see, the 15th patient that I see does not get the same cognitive effort from me that the first patient does. And I just can't help it. That's not an intentional thing. We also know that the human mind is just full of systematic biases that we cannot easily overcome. No matter how aware we are of their existence, no matter how mindful we are of whether or not we might be falling prey to them, it is extremely difficult to get around our cognitive biases. We are extremely poor at predicting probability, at estimating risk. Those kinds of things, we are not evolutionarily designed to be able to do very well. And diagnosis is all about probability. It's all about, is this more probable than this, which is more probable than that? Yet we're very, very poor evolutionarily, as I said, at doing this. But I think machines will be able to do it far better than we do, ultimately.
It's awesome what you're saying, and yeah, just playing off of that and doing the proper Bayesian reasoning to consider the actual prior probability as well as how indicative the evidence is to adjust that probability.
I did a teaching session this morning where I was trying to explain to my colleagues Bayesian reasoning around a diagnostic test that had been done and was inappropriately interpreted. No matter how much we talk about this is a very effortful thing for us to do. It's effortful for us to know how to do it, and it is effortful for us to actually do it. But a machine can do this without any problem whatsoever. Every historical question that I ask, every physical exam finding that I have, every ancillary test result that I have has a likelihood ratio to it that adjusts my pre-test probability to a post-test probability. That is Bayesian reasoning. Very, very difficult for us to do, but machines can do it exceedingly well.
All right. Now to take those are all the good things. So computers have no problem with attention. They have no problem with simultaneous attention to 200 variables and doing an accurate computation. However, they're only as good as what you've put into them. So one of the issues is that if you're training an algorithm, and now neural networks, deep neural networks are the most popular way, which is just to say it gets the input stimulus and it combines all the interactions between them and then creates an output stimulus. Yes, that's diabetes or notice or whatever. It's trained on data. So what was the data? Now, in New Zealand, maybe just extra especially, was the data appropriate to us? Because, for instance, there's a lot of Maori and Pacific people here, and their risks are, for many things, are quite different than the rest of our population. Well, where was it trained? Was it trained in one of our hometowns like Baltimore or Boston, where there's a lot less Maori people, or even in Australia? So where did you source the data that you trained this from? When did you source the data? So another thing is that if a system is trained on what wonderful doctors like Art do, that's maybe okay at the moment. I mean, but as you said, you have your biases. You make choices when you ask questions. So what was recorded as the inputs for past cases is already based on the biases of Art and other humans. Anyway, they're never perfectly, well, if you have anything that's at all subjective that the patient is saying something, I mean, maybe if you measure blood pressure, there's different kinds of error, but it's more objective. And when you reach a diagnosis, you reached it through your reasoning that's based on your biases, which may have included not doing your Bayesian reasoning very, very well. I mean, if you maybe follow up ultimately and go, yes, in the final postmortem, that was a cancerous tumor, or wasn't, you could be more objective. You got to ask, so how was the data sourced? When was it sourced? And neural networks like to get a lot of data. They prefer to get, it's great if you train them on tweets or IMDb or something where you can get billions of instances. That's great. But it's really hard to get billions of medical records. You go, there's 7 billion people. Yeah, but there's not 7 billion people with colon cancer that are getting treated in a state-of-the-art way that you'd actually want to have the data off. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, there's just tens of thousands of people. So very quickly, to collect enough data, you start going back a number of years, and maybe practices changed. And so anyway, so where's your data from? What was the standard of the data that was in it? When was it from? And these are the kind of questions that you, as the doctors of the future, want to always be asking. So when the algorithm says, this person has a 20% risk of whatever, you need to go, well, what did it base that on? How was it trained? How was it evaluated?
I would just say that I agree with your point, but if the title of the conference today is "Will AI take my job?" and will it? As soon as medical information and patient data is managed better, then you'll start to see this take off. Once you can. And there's a lot of research looking into how can you anonymize patient data so that it can be used for these purposes. And that's basically the story of neural networks in a microcosm, right? Neural networks were around in the 70s and the 80s, and they failed because nobody knew that they required so much data. And when the internet kind of connected everybody and all this huge amounts of data was around, people thought, well, and there's an epidemic of data in medicine. There is. And the reason that we're not able to use these systems yet is because we don't manage that data properly. We don't procure it, it's not anonymized, we can't access it. So my argument against you there, Jim, would be that state of affairs will change. And when it does, you'll start to see these machine learning models just take off, I think, personally.
Still is only as good as the data always has biases. Another thing is the models are designed to have, I mean, you're training the model to have a bias. You're training the model to go, okay, this is the person who will respond well to this surgery and the person who won't, or whatever the decision is. You want to formulate its bias. The thing is that particularly with neural networks that make many connections, is that exactly what it's basing that on can be very, very hidden. So if it's using combinations of lab test results and personal history and ethnicity and the deprivation index of their neighborhood and so on. You start to ask, well, how did it make this decision? So we have to be very careful to validate that we're comfortable with how that decision is coming out, because you can come up with the idea of, you have the idea of, so you either get it right, so you can have a true positive or a true negative decision, yes, it's diabetes, or you have false positives and false negatives that, so I thought it was and it wasn't, I thought it wasn't and it was. And you need to watch out the skew of those. So for instance, it would be very easy for a minority group to just dump them all on one decision, to go, oh, well, they're a little bit more biased toward yes, so the answer is, if they're minority, the answer is yes, something like that. And so you need to watch out for the algorithm being equitable across all kinds of people, for instance. So I just said there's constant work to do, but this comes back to job transformation. It's like, yes, we'll make more and more use of the algorithms, and one of the kinds of things that medically trained people will do is have more and more involvement with making sure we've got the best algorithms and they're working well and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think you'll start to, when you're doing your cat, what are they calling cats with Rob Jackson? When you're analysing papers, you'll probably start to see some of these types of publications come in more, like Journal of Oncology, I think, published one on identification of cancerous lesions, suturia to oncologists and dermatologists. And you'll have to do the analysis instead of just looking at the standard medical epidemiological aspects, methodology. You probably start to have to look at things like, how was the model trained and where was the data from? And so probably by necessity, you'll end up having to do a bit more data science in your degree. I definitely hope so. Because it's going to, machine learning are going to become interventions or investigations, and you're going to have to learn how to assess those for clinical application. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And I think the more you can be enthusiastic about it and learn some data science and learn some programming, I think it could potentially enrich the job. So I'm not of a cynical, position in terms of AI taking over jobs. I think it'll change it, and it could change it in ways that are quite cool.
Just going back to what Jim was saying, we were talking before the session, and I was saying there's an example from the University of Chicago where they had trained this algorithm around cardiovascular risk, and they hadn't fed the information into this algorithm around all the different ethnicities. And so it came out that, in fact, African American women were actually low risk for cardiovascular risk. And it was one of the advisors on the board overseeing this, who was a doctor, who was like, hang on, that just can't be right. And said, go back and check this data and make sure that's fine. So similar to what Jester was saying, is that we will be those quality control people going, actually, no, we're on the front line, we see this, can you please recheck things? So I think we will have a very important role.
It's crazy it has to be someone on the board that would bring it up. I mean, that's incredibly bad practice. Anything where you're using these kind of algorithms, you need to have evaluation, you need to have local evaluation.
And we were talking like that's the university, it's the University of Chicago, which is pretty incredible. What about all these other little startups that are coming up? And I've been involved with a few where I've seen no medical people at all on their founders or on their advisory board, and it's quite concerning. Especially with one that came out just recently, and they were into genomics and predicting somebody's chance of doing exercise based on genomics. And I was like, oh, so what are the founders' degrees? And like, oh, they're both personal trainers. And they've raised $2 million for the startup. And I was like, okay. So yeah, I think that we're going to have to be that voice of caution as well, being like, okay, guys, yes, this is big money as well as big business. So yeah, we're going to be careful about who's coming into this scene as well.
So the way I think this discussion is headed is we've talked about biases in data sets leading to AI making these sorts of decisions which have bias in them. So really what I think this is leading to is, will AI lead to the propagation of health inequalities and health inequities? What are our thoughts on this?
It can, and it can also be an awesome tool for, for us doing better. So some of the work I do is more epidemiological in nature, and just pointing out areas where inequality exists. So I use the big data from the New Zealand healthcare system. I'm very interested in cardiovascular medication adherence. So do people take their statins? And guess what? So, you know, that, for instance, Maori and Pacific people on average probably have, look at the abstracts in my work instead of me paraphrasing it, but in general, we'll have lower medication adherence in many different specific circumstances that I've studied in primary prevention, secondary prevention. So you go, well, what is inequality? Well, guess what? Inequality isn't just, I mean, there's probably many things, but you know, maybe inequality comes from diet, maybe inequality comes with seeking out healthcare services, maybe inequality has something genetic to it. But hey, here's another component, is that for all the psychosocial reasons that one might choose to adhere to their medication or not, there's inequality, again, compounding on there because the evidence-based medicine isn't being taken as regular by one group as another. So I think there's tremendous, I mean, that's using data in an epidemiological way, there's tremendous potential to, and then, you know, to build into algorithms things that might address that. Maybe the answer is that for somebody that's at higher risk for non-adherence, that we automatically flag somebody to follow up with them, or that we concentrate our resources for these new nurse practitioner doctors who should talk to people about why they take their medication after you've already diagnosed and prescribed. We need more follow-up because medication adherence across the general population is kind of the 60% adherence is generally what you're going to get on long-term medication. So, you know, maybe we can use algorithms very nicely. By default, the algorithms can potentially be really, really ugly in what they do. So in areas where they're well established, algorithms are increasingly being used to rank your CV and cover letter if you apply to a large organization. So if you apply to a job for a large organization, if you can mention Oxford or Cambridge, apparently that's really, really helpful because that's a good thing, right? And so if you just can mention that in your cover letter, you'll probably get moved up the queue a little bit. It's okay if you mention it in white ink on a white background because the computer will still read that. So you can't think of any other way to mention it, just use it that way. But similarly, hearsay now, but an algorithm that was used, I think it was in Silicon Valley, but it could be here in Auckland, would use distance of your home address from the employer as a predictor of your eventual performance. Well, what would that look like, say, for right here at Auckland City Hospital? Well, guess what? Remuera is closer than, you know, Manukau is closer than Takanini, isn't it? So is that correlated to anything else about people? Maybe it is, but clever algorithm will pick that up. So this comes back to the idea that we want to be very careful what we put into our algorithm and what we use it for.
But I think it also depends on what kind of inequality you're talking about, actually. If you're talking about expensive genomics leading to expensive treatments, then that may exacerbate inequality. But if you're talking about using personal health data in a diagnostic algorithm and combined with telehealth, for example, to treat people in more rural or isolated areas, well, then it can actually diminish inequality. I mean, there's lots of work being done right now with little peak flow meters and other meters that attach to your smartphone that link to sensors that can determine with reasonable accuracy when your respiratory excursion begins to change. And those can be used to alert physicians and patients that an asthma exacerbation is about to happen before it happens. So those kinds of things, I think, actually have the promise, at least if they're used correctly, to diminish inequality. But there is certainly the risk that expensive technologies that are not accessible to certain socioeconomic groups will only make things worse. But that's not a problem with the technology itself. It's a problem with how we roll it out.
it's accessibility in a way, isn't it? Has anybody worked out of Auckland or done a placement? Like Rotorua Hospital, for example, I did some locums there, and they didn't previously thrombolyze strokes, which is kind of best practice, but then they brought in telehealth. It's not AI, but it's technology. All of a sudden, after hours thrombolysis was available to Rotorua Hospital, and that's a pretty impoverished population that they look after. And that's a good example of how technology, if it's well utilized, can potentially, at least that's not been proven yet, but help to address inequality. So I don't think it's really depends where the motivation lies, I think.
And a similar with Lance O'Sullivan, he's doing something with iWalk, and one of the things they do, actually, interesting, the nurse practitioner comment, because he uses nurse practitioners with some paediatric registrar, they oversee all of they take photos, for instance, of a kid in a child care centre that might have a skin condition, and then they'll send it through, and then they triage it and use clinical support decision software, so a little bit of AI, and then they also double check that as clinicians as well, and then formulate a plan. So in that case, iWalk is definitely leveraging technology to be able to support people. But then, you are talking about people who do have access to, for instance, genomics, to becoming healthier and happier as well. And yeah, they're very much more able to do preventative and keeping well, whereas I feel like some of the inequalities might come in when we are only being really ableist at the bottom of the cliff.
I just wanted to go off what Jim was saying earlier, like this whole idea with AI and big data, this idea when it comes to computer science, garbage in, garbage out. So it's all about quality of data that you put in really determines what you can work with. And like the example I wanted to mention was, we've been kind of talking about the Māori population in New Zealand. It's like there's already biases against them, but a big part of it is that they also don't report back to us. We don't get much statistics on them. We don't get much engagement with the health service from them. And so that just makes it a lot harder to leverage this technology for them. So I thought it was quite cool at the beginning of this year, when there was this conference, Aotearoa 2018. It was quite led by Māori kind of origin doctors, Marie Stewart and another doctor, I couldn't remember. But yeah, it was really cool. There was this huge kind of engagement with this technology from those leading members of the Māori population. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is that, when it comes to inequality going forward in terms of health and big data, we should all be really, really engaging with each patient we're working with. We're all part of this. It's so important for us to ensure the quality of the data that's going in. Yeah.
Recently, I just saw that Stanford University has got together a whole lot of data experts, and they formed 10 guidelines for data health and digital health, and also the American Medical Association, the AMA, have also formed a whole committee just around ethics of health data. So I think they're a bit late, but hey, it happened last year, so it'll be interesting to see. And I think the UN has just put out a call as well, asking for people who are interested. I'm sure their inbox is going to be overwhelmed with people who are interested in setting some guidelines globally as well.
It's important that we all look for our health data, say New Zealand's health data. There's been some issues, some prickly issues with the UK National Health Service. There has some very open data policies. It's very important that that everybody, Maori Pacific, Pakeha, Asian, whatever, that we engage in the concept of the ownership and leveraging and advantages of our data, maybe most importantly toward the most disadvantaged communities, and engaging them, because an unfortunate possibility that could build inequality, and I think would tend to, is when the data is available to for-profit interests. So this was one of the controversies in the UK, is that a company was able to use NHS data, develop a product off of that, training a neural network, make a decision tool, whatever they were doing. But of course, companies can also use the data to to guide their choices in drug discovery and new research, to decide what kind of products they want to make. And I mean, New Zealand healthcare system is, a million times better than the US healthcare system for this, but still the for-profit decision is going to probably go to sell things to people who've got money, and it probably isn't going to be that the best for-profit opportunities are for the poorest and most disadvantaged people. So we need to think very actively about how we, all New Zealanders, and you medical students, as very important representatiors of New Zealanders, and look for it to be best for New Zealand what we do for the data, and not just used, and not only used opportunistically for people who maybe want to maximize their profit.
Yeah. So following up from what Kieren said about Maori data being less compared to the non-Maori data, if in the future, the scenario I see is that in the future, it could come where there are plenty of algorithms that could help and assist non-Maori population, but then there are all these lacking algorithms that just don't apply to the Maori. And as medical clinicians, do you think we should be embracing all these algorithms anyways, or should we be trying to hold it back and wait, and then actually just promote Maori engagement before, so to not propagate the inequities? That makes sense.
Sounds like you're having ethical debate in your mind on what to do is right. I mean, personally, I would say that I think it's if we have technology in place that would help other people, and they're not Māori, I think we should be using them and not just artificially keeping them back. But because that's just kind of like, it's not. Well, that wouldn't be right when you have technology available but you can't use it. But I mean, in that situation also, I guess it's important to keep in mind, we have to be doing more for populations such as Māori in that situation. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I don't think you'd hold back, potentially beneficial treatments to people just because, about Western inequalities. It's more the fact that when you're establishing working groups and guidelines, you step along the way. These things are usually a matter of having at the forefront of your mind the fact that every step you take is worse than inequalities. So it's kind of bringing that ethos into your procedure and saying, okay, well, if we're going to plan to bring out this new treatment that's available for investigation, it's been trained of Pakeha data, what about Māori? And so it's like just not forgetting about that, I think, perhaps, as it is a procedural matter. But my ethical position would be that it would be unethical to hold back potentially beneficial treatments just because they might worsen inequalities. You can argue that.
I think practically it's hard to hold them back. If they're out there, they will be used. But I think as a clinician, when I order a new test or a new drug that's come on the market, it's incumbent upon me to understand the uses and limitations of that test and the uses and limitations of that drug. And so, understanding how algorithms work and understanding, as people have said, that the data can bias what the algorithm does, I need to understand that, and I need to understand how to use it as a tool. Nothing is going to be perfect, and as a clinician, that's one of the hardest parts of our job, is to understand when I order a test, I need to know under what circumstances that test has a good positive likelihood ratio or a negative likelihood ratio. I need to understand the operating characteristics of that test. And it's going to be the same for these algorithms.
There is an emerging area within artificial intelligence about addressing equity, not limited to medical artificial intelligence, but like I'm saying about examples of prioritizing people for a job interview or any sort of thing, or the effectiveness of face recognition software, or software that says that you match your passport photo or need to be thrown into a queue to be considered suspicious, which works a lot better if you're a white male than if you're somebody else, and things like that. that in every branch of application of AI, it's now an activated area that's growing is to look at the bias. And the bias is very, I mean, the mathematics that's most natural is very simply that those that are the smaller part of the sample size are easiest to be relegated to being unimportant. That's the mathematics. It's like if you look at percentage accuracy, I want an algorithm that has the highest possible accuracy. Well, you want it to be most accurate for the largest group, and the other people that are weirder and rarer on the edges, whoever they are less important to that accuracy statistic. So what's the remedy to that? The remedy is that you don't just go for the highest accuracy, that you actually care about the performance across the breadth of the population. Another remedy is, you seek out to address the data imbalance, and you go, well, I actually want data from people who aren't white males and stuff like that. The Wikipedia has a bias that it's very largely white males that write the Wikipedia. We need more women writing. I guess they have better things to do than some of us. But we need more women. We need more diverse people from other cultures and other groups writing the Wikipedia, because you know what? Sometimes when we train an AI, one of the best resources to use for, you want to teach an AI about stuff, you have it data mine the Wikipedia. That's who wrote the Wikipedia.
Anyway, Wikipedia is so hopeless to learn from.
Lots of reasons for that. But just as a for instance, so this question, the two questions that we need as computer scientists, we're learning the responsibility to train things to not just optimize overall performance, but which is actually performance on the most common group, but to make sure that performance has a decent spread across the less common group, and then the idea to make sure data is better represented so that some groups are not, just unavailable or underrepresented in your data.
Just had a question there. I noticed that you made an example of pharmaceutical drugs and technologies being two things that clinicians will use with their patients. I was just wondering what role you think the government would have and these overarching bodies to kind of control the access that patients would get. Like if the area of health information and new technologies is so privatized right now, what kind of system change do you think we'll see that makes sure that people in lower socioeconomic groups will still have access to those technologies?
That's a very good question. I don't know. Should or could there be something like Pharmac for technologies? There's a movement afoot, and I think it's actually changed recently. Liz, you might know about this, but whether Pharmac actually now has purview over heart valves and other medical hardware that used to be generally unregulated. So, there were lots of instances of people using non-approved in New Zealand anyway, hardware for heart operations, etc., because they were FDA approved. So perhaps there could and should be something in New Zealand that oversees the development and the utilization of various algorithms, genomics, those kinds of things, to make sure that they're used appropriately, and it just can't be used by an early adopter who doesn't perhaps think about the limitations of the data and the limitations of whatever the technology is. I don't know. I know Pharmac gets a bad rap, but compared to what happens in the U.S., it's a godsend.
It really is. The drug companies hate Pharmac, but New Zealanders, we are so pleased to have it. They do have a whole department for medical devices.
Which is relatively new.
Yeah, so I think I was third year medical student.
5 years ago. And they did like a roadshow through New Zealand, and they just pretty much told all the clinicians, we're looking after medical devices now. And it came quite topical when like they had the surgical mesh drama, because that was approved by FDA, but then it wasn't approved by local, and they've had a whole lot of dramas around that. So that's why I think that regulation is getting tightened up in New Zealand. So yeah, it's really interesting space, and I know I've got a personal belief that health data actually belongs to you. It's like your financial data. I can log into my bank account anytime and see my bank, but for health, that's all the power is held with the clinicians. And I think that what's happening now is that's completely being flipped, and consumers are being like, hey, I want my data. And I think that we're going to start seeing that power change, and I think that's actually quite a good thing. But with that comes a whole layer of complexity. And I think like in primary healthcare, they've tried to do like the management health systems where you can log in and see certain things, and they've had issues with that. But actually, they've made headway, and patients are saying that they love it. They love being able to see their lipids results, and they're able to be more proactive about their health because they understand more. So I think that that's going to be something we're going to see developing, and we're going to have to get much better at writing our notes, because, you know, in discharge summaries, we're like, but actually, that's going to go on someone's record forever, and they're going to read that and understand that. So we're going to have to change how we do things. And I know they probably all hate writing discharge summaries, but I think that that's actually a very key component in that transition of health information and health education to patients as well.
That one actually, like, I think maybe just something, maybe in the future, some magic solution from the AI, you know, they'll automatically populate some kind of like discharge summary for us, so we don't have to do that as much. Hopefully, I don't know when that happens.
That would be great. Who's here is at Waitemata District Health Board? Yeah. I saw someone who left and they had here the lanyard. I was going to pull them out actually. No one else has done any placements. What year are you guys? Second? Who's second? Yeah. Who's third? Hey, it's cool. So you guys are yet to experience this whole hospital scene. Very exciting. So Waitemata, I would say, is probably leading the way, is with Christchurch Hospital as well. Both of them are doing, yay, there you go. Are doing huge amounts of things with their data. I know that Waitemata, they've got a system called Click, which is QLIK. And they just pull in a whole lot of stuff, especially around emergency department. They're focused on that and pulling out all the data from admissions and triages and flows through the hospital. And so what they're doing is they're getting all the clinicians, all the doctors, nurses, healthcare assistants, anybody who wants to know about it, you can go and do a Click workshop and learn about how this data is generated and how you can use it. So I really like their approach, how they're upskilling everybody in the organisation when it comes to data and making it accessible and dashboards. Which is in real time, which is really exciting as well. And then Christchurch, I don't know if you can speak about what you guys are doing.
Only Cortex.
Cortex?
I think that's, is that what you mean?
I think so, I don't know.
Oh, okay, I guess, yeah, we have Cortex. It's just like, everyone has iPads and stuff, and they go around. Not in every ward, it's kind of being rolled out, but currently, like on surgical wards, like you just have, whereas in the past you write on paper, it's just writing on iPads now, and so everyone has access to it, and it's like just everywhere. It's a lot more convenient, you could say. Yeah.
Because I do some locum shifts in different hospitals, and so like at Auckland Hospital, you're still having to handwrite your medical drug chart.
You still use fax machines. Who in the world uses a fax machine? Fax referrals, you know.
And I don't even know how to spell drugs anymore. Because we've got MedChart, which looks like it's from the 1980s. But it works, it's pretty good. But I don't even know how to spell drugs anymore, because I just type it in and it comes up and it tells me the dose and it tells me the rate. And I don't remember that stuff anymore. And so when I go to work at Auckland City Hospital, I'm like, oh my gosh.
We are in the dark ages. When I left Boston 15 years ago, we had a fully electronic medical record. And I've come here 15 years later. I'm writing out my notes and faxing referrals to subspecialists. I just feel like I'm in a time warp.
What do you think is getting in the way of that kind of, I don't even know if you call it innovation anymore, but us getting to that stage where these electronic data collections are where they kind of should be?
I mean, some of that is you might call it implementation, you know, and I mean, New Zealand, it is a little tricky in that, you know, our GDP per capita is to use more acronyms, is one of the lowest in the OECD. You know, we don't have quite as much money as Australians or Americans, unfortunately, and that can translate into problems for purchasing power when you're purchasing something like health IT. Furthermore, we have nation-specific requirements that are spread across only 4 million or so, 4 or 5 million people. Whereas if it's the UK or the US, it's spread over, in the US, 300 and some million people. So it's cheaper to make a software product that fits the US than it is to make one that fits New Zealand. So there's a few very simple reasons that, you know, we're behind, that it's really anybody's fault, you know.
I think our political will as well. So again, like the NZMSA, they do lots of lobbying with different groups. And for instance, the government has made some great changes recently. They've allocated like 100 million into mental health, into mental health strategies. And yet I know some people that are sitting on that task force and they've got no plan for it. They've got this money and they say it's a great thing, but then they need people like us to say, actually, this is how it should be done. So it's one thing to get it in and get the political will, and then it's about the implementation. And yeah, we can't sit around and wait for other people to do it. If you want to get involved, put your hand up and get involved on task force groups.
I'm just kind of more interested in what your guys' projects are at the moment, what areas you're in, and what is up and coming in terms of AI that will be implemented in the future or is currently being implemented.
I'll let them speak.
Get to plug channel.
Oh yay, channel! I accidentally fell into channel. It was a research project and it went really well with medical students in Dunedin. So it was a way about reporting things that were happening for them in the workplace, in particular an anonymous channel to report sexual harassment, bullying in the workplace. We did a national survey with the NZMSA and found that 54% of medical students had experienced bullying or sexual harassment whilst on clinical placement. And that is actually backed up now by international data. That is actually, it's not just a New Zealand issue, it's international. And surgeons, unfortunately, are more likely to experience than not. And so Royal College of Surgeons have done lots of work around that. And so we designed this app for people to be able to use to get help for their situations that they were facing. And yeah, so through Auckland University, Uni Services, they've commercialised that now. So now we're officially a tech startup. Thought I was going to be a medical doctor, didn't know if I was going to be running a tech startup, but that's what's happened. And yeah, getting lots of traction. And we're looking at investing a lot into how we can be predictive. So say taking lots of Internet of Things, taking lots of data, and seeing how we can predict to see where a hotspot would be in a hospital. Say, I know bias again about surgeons, but say it is a surgical department that has got a particular issue, about how we can predict that and support those staff better. Yeah, so that sums it up.
I'm aware of quite a few different things that are interesting to different people. Like, if you're really interested in this type of thing, you just read some of the medical journals and just write a neural network, and you'll find some of these really specific tasks that have shown some really interesting findings on, and retinoscopy as well, retinography, sorry, radiographs and CT scans. Basically, you can look through all these types of data sets and find that neural net can do good inference and outperform or perform as good as specialist panels and kind of coming up with conclusions. Often they're binary, like suspicious nodule present or not. So some of them are still quite basic, but the retinography is quite interesting. I think they initially did research looking at, okay, can it just identify diabetic retinopathy? But then there were some kind of ancillary findings that were really unusual in some of those studies, like in fact, they were able to predict other things that were unanticipated, like future risk of myocardial infarction and these types of things. And you think, well, you know, we're not doing anything near that. And so that's quite exciting. And then there's taking kind of full body photography, looking for suspicious melanomas published in oncology journals. And these systems do really well at detecting those types of tasks. So there's heaps of research out in that. My own stuff at the moment's in language, because language is a harder task for neural networks. It's also kind of more interesting. I'm trying to basically find an optimal way to engineer a virtual counselor. And you can, when you build a chatbot, you can go in and build a chatbot and just program it using a rule-based system, which is like if the user says any number of these things, then respond with this, or etc. And so it's a fully kind of programmed system. My interest is in finding a neural network that can learn what are the best types of what's called like a dialogue move, given a certain state of a conversation. So you can represent the state of a conversation as a vector, or in 1,000 dimensions, and you can say take a number of preceding dialogue turns as well. You can go back and you can store this huge array and feed that into the neural network. And the neural network will output, okay, which one of these 100 dialogue moves is the best. And then I'm trying to get it to learn off cognitive behavioral therapy scripts. It's quite early days for me because I've spent the year trying to find out what are kind of interesting and promising approaches for this. But I'm going to be going more forward with that. That's in the psychology space and the language space. That's really interesting. Also in the language space with AI and neural networks is mining clinical notes, which is quite relevant for people who are still writing their notes like ADHD because we can't access that data. But there's been some studies which are old now, at least 5 years old, showing that you can run algorithms on clinical notes and automatically populate a problem list, which is almost as good as what a specialist would do manually on the clinical notes. And I personally think that's fantastic because that's an aspect of the job which is shit. You spend half the day just doing admin, and if you can get really good systems that can take some of that administrative burden off you so that you can spend more time with the patient, communicating, just being there, doing procedures, translating information to them in a way more meaningful to them, I think that's good. So those are kind of some of the different areas that are really interesting. And what I'm doing fits in there somewhere.
I share Chester's interest in counseling apps and things, particularly what they can do, say, for teen mental health and resilience, and the exciting frontier of applying neural networks to actually learn the dialogue policy, how to choose what to say, and maybe to mix that with more manually expert counselor scripted kind of things to say. I don't seem to be doing very well at dialogue myself at the moment. And I'm very interested in this question of neural networks and how to make them better, including one of my PhD students is working on explanation of the neural network's reasoning, so that we can understand whether or not we're happy with how the neural network is reaching its decision. So that's all part of making this more acceptable. Particularly when you take something like a counseling app and decide to download it, and there are thousands of them on the Play Store or whatever that you could download now. Just nearly all of them are not evidence-based, unfortunately. They're made by entrepreneurs. This area of consumer health informatics, back to the original question of equity, is potentially problematic in that if we start to get AIs that through counseling, AIs that through reading your Fitbit data and giving you advice about what to do and so on, as these start to become evidence-based, as these start to become actually effective, right now mostly they're not, so it doesn't matter, but then we can create a new inequality. And similarly, you mentioned managed by health, the idea that your doctor makes your medical record or these parts of it available for you online. That's done widely in the US. Kaiser Permanente does that for 40 million clients or something. The patient that is more computer literate, that's just more educated, that has better self-efficacy, that has more time and will to take care of themselves instead of their grandchildren or whatever, that patient will be more effective at using the consumer health informatics tools. And, there's a very big movement that says that, the patient that we will re-engineer the healthcare system to be more truly patient-centered, to be more responsive to this electronically enabled patient. And unfortunately, I think there will be, the old term's the digital divide. That's probably a little too binary now, but there will be a difference in efficacy of some people to be digital patients versus others, and so that could actually be a promoter of inequality. If, that would be its natural trend, and we will need to make deliberate effort to not push that trend too hard. I'm always the negative guy.
I mean, I'm not involved in research at all, but I am very interested in clinical reasoning and how to teach clinical reasoning, how to use clinical reasoning at the bedside. I'm quite excited about the development of sort of portable clinical support systems that can be used even in a fully paper-based hospital system. There's a couple of different systems called Isabel and one called Visual DX, and I've used those fairly extensively, and I use them in front of patients, I use them in front of students, just try to get over this idea that I am the fountain of all knowledge and the diagnosis issues forth from me. I think we need a cultural change in terms of how you guys approach diagnosis and how you engage patients in the process, patients, nurses, physiotherapists, etc., in the process of diagnosis. So I'm quite excited about the future of these clinical support systems. Right now, they're a bit clunky, but even now in their clunky form, they can be quite helpful. I'm quite keen on an organization called Human DX, which has an app that you can access that allows you to solve cases submitted from all over the world. And what they do is it's used as an educational tool because they've got great cases I can go through. It forces me to put in a differential diagnosis. They drip feed me bits of information. I adjust my differential diagnosis. And in the background, they're keeping track and collecting data about which bits of information for various presentations are the most discriminatory. Which questions, which bits of data are the most important based upon how humans think. And the idea is to try to ultimately have some sort of algorithm based upon human cognitive data running behind an electronic health record, for example, to prompt certain questions, to prompt certain avenues of questions that might not have been thought of. So I'm quite excited about all of those sorts of things. In terms of future need for clinical reasoning and teaching clinical reasoning, right now the health system is terrible at providing diagnostic feedback. So I can make 100 errors a day, and unless somebody dies, I don't ever find out about it. No engineer in the world would engineer a system whereby you don't provide feedback in order to improve the system. But right now, certainly in the clinical reasoning realm, there's virtually no feedback that's provided. And so I'm interested in exploring ways where we might be able to provide real-time diagnostic feedback for students and trainees in particular.
So you kind of touched on art, and all of you kind of described what you see the future of medicine looking as AI and technology develops further. But I was wondering what your takes on basically the role of the medical student and perhaps as the junior doctor trying to learn how to navigate this new clinical world. What are things that we need to know for the future that will look like what you've described?
Well, yeah, me.
Yeah, you're a medical student.
I think, I'm quite appropriate to answer that question. I think that as medical students going forward and as junior doctors, we should know the basics of AI, like kind of what we've been talking about today, like these kind of ethical things. We should know how AI works, like how is machine learning, what's the foundation of that, what's sort of basically it all founds on regression, like that's that y equals mx plus c. Basically that's it. But extended further and further. So knowing that kind of the theory of it, the basic theories. Knowing a bit about programming and being able to program, that's quite important. And just, having an interest in the field, because it is very complicated and it's still a forming field. There's no kind of like set pathway into it or anything at the moment. And then when you're in there, just like knowing that you're doing something really important for the future. That's my take.
I think you guys are doing the right thing. You're all in this room learning about it, and I'm worrying for the 250 other students who are not in this room learning about it, because it is an area where it's actually kind of hard to find this information. I've just learnt by getting involved and talking to people and asking questions, and there's no set course that you can do. You can do a health informatics course, but whilst you're a medical student, I found the workload of just being a medical student was hard enough, let alone trying to learn to program and do other things. So I think just by being aware, being open and asking questions, watching any YouTube clips you can, maybe not reading Wikipedia, but I do a lot of Wikipedia reading. Learning about blockchain, like how does that work, and those kind of things, just to keep up to date with things. And just I think showing interest is probably the best thing. Blockchain. I just sprinkle. No, you sprinkle AI, you sprinkle blockchain, and everybody's like, oh, they know what they're talking about.
I would say there are three things that would be good to serve you in the future. One is probably most importantly to have like an open, enthusiastic attitude, and to have the attitude that you can actually enrich your future place in the workforce by having a good attitude towards this area. Some people, I think, are trying to close the blinders and pretend it's not happening, and I don't think they're going to fare as well. So attitude's important. Second is when you can, because you're probably too busy to separately learn to do heaps of programming, but when you can, trying to integrate this into what is already your workload. Like if you've got a journal club to do, see if you can find a paper that might be on a neural net doing diagnostics in your head, and do that as your CAT presentation or something. It slowly creeps in there a little bit. And then you're bringing this into the clinical dialogue more. So that'd be good without imposing more work on you. Third would be, really, I think it's great if you can get your toes in the water. And if you can learn to do basic programming with Python, then it's quite fun from a creative aspect, but also you could potentially, over time, integrate a little bit of data engineering, because when you have to do research projects, especially your specialist exams, you can do a lot more data engineering if you know a little bit of Python, very basic even, than you can do, say, in Excel. And you can totally manipulate Excel using basic Python. So it doesn't require much expertise in the area to integrate that into your own research. There are some really great free online resources. I'll put my favorite ones up on your Facebook page afterwards. So they're just fantastic in terms of understanding some of this stuff, learning basic Python programming, and just generally cool things. But I think those three things would serve you really well for the future.
To complement what's already been said, I'll try one on behalf of the two oldest guys in the room, is that looking out at you all, you've got so many decades of career ahead of you, and stuff is going to change so much. By the time I had gotten my PhD in computer science, the World Wide Web was invented the next year. Okay, so my field of computer science has just changed ridiculously. Now, what kind of computer science professor can I be without learning? What kind of doctor can you be without learning and adapting? And what kind of citizen can any of us be if we don't, keep up with the technologies and what the apps can do for us and all the different things? So, you have to keep an open and nimble mind to negotiate these next 40 or with improving life expectancies, 50 years of your career. I will also make the narrower comment then is in terms of, kind of specific things, when you're presented, notice when you're presented with IT and decision support tools in your clinical environment as you go out to your placements and training, and don't take it for granted. Be curious, be critical. Where did this come from? What exactly is this? How has it been quality assured? Go ahead and ask the tough questions. Presumably your senior consultant guys will tell you to shut up and go back to work. But, be questioning of your environment. At the larger level, there is Health Informatics New Zealand is a membership body that you can join. They do have quite an amazing conference that would be relatively affordable for students. This year it's in Hamilton in November. Probably won't fit your schedule, but just to say, look out for the opportunities. As you get further into your career, I know that you guys actually do have quite a lot of opportunity to attend conferences and things like that. So, think about going to Health Informatics New Zealand or HIC, which is a terrible name, Health Informatics Conference of the Health Informatics Society of Australia. It happens every year, so just a slightly, our Big Brother's version of that show. Or over to the American Medical Informatics Association conference. So I think that's a relatively easy thing for you to do with your professional development time, is to engage with that. If you're really interested, there is a postgraduate diploma in health informatics through the School of Population Health. So, as you think about what degrees you want to stack on after the MD, CHB, or whatever yours is, consider, for instance, postgraduate diploma in health informatics if you're really, really going to get into it. There's a question.
Talking of the continuous learning in our careers and the role, the role of learning in medical students and the role of doctors in the workforce, you were mentioning how you don't really pay much attention to the names of the drugs that you're prescribing when you're using computers.
You only said you can't spell.
I can't spell them.
Can't spell them. As we advance in this field and we become possibly more reliant on that kind of thing, do you think we might be at risk of resting on our laurels and then compromising medical education? And when do we decide whether the computer will be superior to us in terms of diagnostic medicine or not? And does it find balance between being able to say that who's better?
I've got an example which is kind of shameful for me to say, so I will say it though. So we've got a cool new system which has got on Clear, where it's got everybody's test results, and it's also got where they've gone to the pharmacy and they've gotten all their medication scripts. And so what we do is when someone comes into the emergency department and I need to put onto their medication chart all their regular medications, I just go to TestSafe and I say, this is their last 5 prescriptions and they've all had these drugs every year. And so I just kind of copy them across. And you're supposed to go and talk to the patient and say, are these the drugs you're on, are these the doses you're on, and confirm that. And in my particular case, I was working in Psych Jerry's, and so my patient wasn't actually able to really give me a good history at the time. And so in hindsight, what I should have done is gone and got collateral history and spoken with the wife and spoken with somebody else. But at the time, you're time pressured, it was late at night, and you're working a 15.5-hour rostered shift, which, by the way, you never get home before midnight. And you're starting at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Welcome to medicine. And so anyway, so I checked with the pharmacist, I checked on TestSafe, and I tried to check with the patient, but not quite sure what the quality of the information was. And it wasn't until the next day on the ward when the psychiatrist said, why is this person on 40 milligrams of prednisone? And I said, that's because they've got COPD. And he's like, well, did they got a flare of COPD? What is going on? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Why are they on 40 milligrams? And it turns, yeah. And so it turned out that was a medication error, and that had been prescribed for another patient under that patient's name. And so it was a transcribing error. And so it just all of a sudden to me realized, oh my gosh, we can, if
we're relying on these healthcare systems that are coming through and taking it as accurate. But yeah, we need to be really careful and double checking where that information is coming from and making sure it's correct. So going back to the patient, getting the collateral, doing the basics of medicine, and doing that right, and using tech as a support tool and as an assistance, but we still need to do the basics right. Otherwise, we will be giving our patients the wrong medication.
When writing was invented, people lamented the fact that our memories were going to degrade. So, I see students running around the hospital, trying to find a good heart murmur to listen to with their stethoscope that was invented in 1816 and hasn't really changed very much. The future is going to be point-of-care ultrasound, where you have a probe that you put on someone's chest and you actually get an accurate depiction of what's happening with their heart and what's happening in their lungs rather than guessing. You're never going to have to measure a JVP again because it's the most fudged finding in all of medicine. So I don't personally lament the loss of relatively useless, antiquated strategies for collecting data. If we can be more accurate with point-of-care ultrasound, why should we be wasting your time, learning how to use a stethoscope? The technology is there. We need to embrace it in that regard. But there was a question earlier about what you guys needed to learn about in order to face the future. And I think it's not factual things that you need to learn. You need to learn attitudinal things. You need to be curious, intensely curious, but also intensely skeptical. Because there's a lot of charlatans out there. There are a lot of things that will sound great, but will not bear evidence when they're used. So you need to remain curious and skeptical, and you need to also realize that things are changing. We are no longer the hub from which healthcare is dispensed, right? We are part of a much larger network. We need to get over ourselves in some ways, this understanding or this realization or this thinking that everything flows from us. When you get into the hospital, you will find lots of dinosaurs like me who still think that they are the most important part of the healthcare system. And in fact, we're not. We are part of the system. But that was just a little aside. But I don't lament the loss of relatively inaccurate methods or technologies.
I'd like to add to that. That's really good. Yeah, like some of the most painful experiences I can remember in the hospital were working with people who clearly didn't know or they're too uncertain about something, but they weren't comfortable admitting it. And I like to see, and I've seen people who have said, I don't know what the answer is here, and you're on board round, and you think, let's just sit down and look this up on UpToDate. And for me, that's a really positive attitude. It's admitting you don't know, and then it's using a resource in a way that's going to really assist your practice. And so already, I think it's a great illusion that we hold all this accurate information and knowledge in our mind and we use it, and that we're going to lose all of that if we move to these systems. I think if we have an attitude where we recognise truly what we don't know and use systems in an intelligent, critical, discerning way, then that is better for the patient. And so I think we really do overvalue this kind of knowledge base that we have, because really when you're working, you don't know something UpToDate in the hospital is fantastic. And probably we're just going to remove the man in the middle, and UpToDate will be integrated into the system that's used as a knowledge in due course. But your skill set will also change, because robotics is probably far behind than some of these diagnostic systems. So you may end up doing more procedures, which is cool. Personally, I enjoy procedures. So you could end up doing things that are more enjoyable and more satisfying, and other skills that are underdeveloped could be better. So.
Yeah, and we don't lament the fact that I don't know how to put a leash on somebody and let them, psych out the ill humors. I mean, I don't lament that. There's never a good practice, and there are better ways to do it. So.
And it was interesting that you said around radiologists being out of date. Well, actually, the traditional radiologists might be out of date, but the interventional radiologist is a booming field. So you won't be putting chest drains in blind anymore. They'll be doing it for you under guidance. So. Oh, there you go. But like all the endovascular stuff that they're doing as well. There's a whole new field developing. So even though that might be a bit redundant, there's definitely new areas of emerging medicine that you can get into, which I think is really cool.
Ultrasound's a great example. I've seen people who have been, I don't know ultrasound, I don't want to learn ultrasound as an attitude, compared to people who have just been like, I want to learn this, they picked it up. And, when you're in the WOPs and somebody comes in with pericardial tamponade, you can save their life. Whereas, very hard to do that with ultrasound.
It's not even in the WOPs, actually. There have been studies that show that point-of-care ultrasound is far more accurate than chest X-ray, history, and physical exam in diagnosing heart failure. It's not, it's great in the WOPs when you're trying to save someone's life, but regular diagnostic things, we overestimate how accurate we are when we're not. And I remember when I was training, I was listening to a chest and I said, I think I hear some rowels. And they said, well, are they rowels or they're bronchi? As though that person knew the difference, right? I mean, we just pretend a lot. I mean, I see people looking at JVPs, yes, it's -1. And I think, wow, that's, I'm lucky if I can see it. We do a lot of sort of self-congratulatory stuff that has no meaning in medicine, really. We just need to get over ourselves.
One more. I don't know if you guys know Des Gorman, but he was the old head of medical school, headest man in the Navy. He came to this Aotearoa conference at the beginning of the year on AI, and he said, straight blank, we're not training medical students appropriately at all for the future. And he was reflecting on the fact that the skill set required for you in 10, 15, 20 years is going to be absolutely different. And that's from the previous head of the med school, so the horse's mouth.
Yeah, and there are medical schools in the US that actually, when you begin your clinical training, you don't buy a stethoscope anymore. You buy a point-of-care ultrasound probe, so that you can learn from day one how to use it, because it is the way of the future, and stethoscopes haven't changed much in their technology in hundreds of years. So
this panel is brought to you by Senatech. No endorsement money has been taken by the panel.
Right, so we're getting close to time. So what I'd like you all to do in just the last 10 minutes is each of you just give a couple of minutes, just a broad summary of what you see the future of AI in medicine is going to be. As far as you think is relevant.
You'll get the pre or post-climate problem.
I mean, I see the future as very, very hopeful. From my perspective, I see diagnosis being far more accurate than it currently is. I see clinicians using algorithms, using clinical support tools at the bedside with the patient, inputting information from the patient, from the physiotherapist, from everyone involved in the care of that patient, and sitting down at the end with a much greater understanding of what the possible explanations are for that patient's presentations, having a sort of a ranked order, if you will, of a working diagnosis that's far more accurate, far more comprehensive than I can generate with my knowledge alone, and then helping that patient navigate treatment options based upon a much more accurate diagnostic assessment of what their problems are.
Look, I think that the future is one of, a bunch of incremental progress, a bunch of occasional leaps, like things like iPhones that just suddenly happen, and then we're used to them and don't know how we live without them, and that'll just happen, 10, 20 more times in your career. One that I'll take a punt on is I think we will see patients interacting with computers a lot more. It's important we bring them all along on this, but I think there's many ways technology can.
For the cognitively impaired, including the elderly dementing and elderly patients, for people of different ethnicities and different.
About the doctors.
Yeah, and different literacy levels. But the idea that a person talks to a computer when they're in any way not well, I think is going to become much more normal. So that would include, cognitive behavioral therapy and positive psychology for the things that we're working on for stress and depression and anxiety and things of that nature. But it would also include the idea of giving an initial medical history, and I actually think there could be a lot for that. There can be the idea of the computer explaining a procedure that's going to happen, explaining a surgery that's coming up for the patient or something like that. The idea of delivering truly informed consent about something, the best way that you could do that would be with a rich AI chatbot and multimedia, and not a A4 sheet of paper by any means. So I think we're going to see people interacting with computers more about things that do involve their healthcare, and where those interactions are more richly of an artificial intelligence nature, and taking over a lot of those, supplementing, not taking it as well, supplementing and enhancing the things that healthcare professionals do face to face.
Yeah, I think that the culture of medicine will change a little bit in 10, 20 years. I think it'll distinctively change. I think there'll be more automated diagnostics and more automated kind of health management of data. I think clinicians will be performing less diagnostics. I think there'll be more remotely delivered medicine. So, people who perhaps won't be coming into the hospital so much with things that can be managed remotely. And that remote engagement may be there may be more contact time with specialists through remote engagement possible in that way, at least specialist level expertise. And I think that role of the doctor is going to change somewhat. I think there's going to be some type of evolution away from diagnostics to procedures, and some type of change towards nurse practitioners for certain jobs. And I think overall the care delivered to patients will be better. But there's probably going to end up a little bit of an Orwellian fraughtness in terms of kind of navigating information and artificial intelligence, which is probably going to be a bit disconcerting but unescapable and somewhat interesting. That's the way I see it.
I see it more consumer driven. One of the questions I ask people when they come into hospital is, what do you think is wrong? And number two, have you Googled it? And I would say 9 out of 10 people have Googled things before they come into hospital. And I just think that shows where things are going. People are interested, they want to know what's going on, they kind of want to be preempted about what the doctor's going to ask them. And so I think that there's going to be a whole lot of explosion about the consumer facing products. And I would quite like to see hospitals used as emergency centres and places where people have short-term stays, and that we're able to manage the long-term stays better for people. And I just think that there's just going to be a huge explosion. And my last comments for you guys would be to get involved, because I know there's amazing things that technologies that are being developed by students, by junior doctors. For instance, the smart page system, which you guys don't know about yet, but it's taken an archaic paging system. So if the nurses want to get hold of you, they page you, and it goes beep, 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 and you don't know whether it's an emergency or if it's someone wanting paracetamol. So now there's a junior doctor from Wellington who designed a smart paging app, and basically it's just like Messenger, and the nurses can actually message you. Which,
Aidan Gillespie is my classmate.
There you go. There you go. But anyway, it's revolutionary. It's just like the iPhone. It's like, how do we do anything without smart page?
300,000 lines of Java.
There you go. Did he learn coding at med school?
When he was a teenager, I think. Yeah, just self-taught, just shows you.
So he coded that himself? There you go. We should all be doing software. So anyway, that has totally radicalised how the junior doctor works. It's just such a small thing which makes a huge difference. So if you guys have got an idea about things and you see there's a problem and you think, oh, hey, what about this solution? Just do it. Just get involved. Talk to people like Jim, talk to people like Art, and just say, hey,
say what's going on, and you know, just get involved and be like, hey, I've got this idea, what do you think? Can I do it as a summer project? You know, you guys get so many holidays over the Christmas period. You guys can, you know, use that to like do research articles, and then you get it published. And if you're a published author, when you want to get into your specialists like respiratory training or the really elite ones like plastic surgery, you need to have like 20 publications. And if you're a first author, that is gold. You get points, which nobody really told me about at medical school. So I'm telling you now, start looking at where you're going to go in the future, how you're going to get into the training that you want to get into. And so research and publications is one way to do that. So if you've got an idea, talk to some people, get a group together, go to a hackathon, learn coding, and just really say, can we do something? And it might not work, it might flop, but hey, you've learned so much in the process. And if you've got something like SmartPage, which is now going to the States, and I think it's doing very well. Yeah, he's doing very well. Yeah, you might make some money as well. But hey, the ultimate is that we make lives better for our patients.
Just add what Liz is saying there. When you have an idea or whatever, there's a lot of like competitions and just like support things going on around the university. It's very easy to you know, submit that to them. They'll be like, oh, it's a good idea, and you know, you can take quite far, and you have money to go with. So it's quite cool. But also, Liz mentioned the hackathon. So that was at the start of this year. We had one 2018 Hack Aotearoa, and then we have one next year too. You should all come to that. Because it's really cool. And this is kind of what I want to end on, because so I see the future. I'm hoping that the future is what everyone is saying. It's what it's, you know, all the good things: increased life expectancy, increased quality of life years, equality. Everything happens, and that would be really good. That's what we're here for. But I think there's also the possibility that if AI doesn't achieve those outcomes, and I think where we are at the moment, we should make that happen the right way. So we should get involved, basically. That's what everyone will say. Go there tomorrow, next year, if you want.
All right, thank you, panelists.
Really appreciate your time.
One more round of applause for our panelists. Okay, so before we end, we do have an evaluation form, tinyurl.com/aim-evaluation, so please fill that out now. It's not very long. If you're on the live stream as well, please fill that out. And after that, as Kieren said, get involved, and one way you can do that is by following us on Facebook, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and getting involved with AIM. We're hoping to get more of you guys involved in this sort of stuff, and yeah, I'm very happy to be part of this.